And I'm gonna go get real quick. I gotta get one more thing.
There we go.
Hello, Richard Green.
Now, I need you to speak up.
Hello, Richard Green.
That's much better.
My name is Barb Reid.
Mm-hmm. And Barb Reid, where did you serve in the Peace Corps?
I served in the Peace Corps in Guatemala.
Ah, a lot of turmoil in Guatemala these days.
Yeah.
But,
and a little short term, we probably won't talk about it, but the Dominican Republic.
Oh.
For Christ's Corps. I did that.
Yes.
In 2000. Yeah, just for 3 months.
Now, what were your years in Peace Corps?
My years were 1990 to 1992.
Okay, let's see, first of all, this is March 28th, 2024. I'm here with Barb Reid, a friend of mine, an RPCV from Oklahoma, who served in Guatemala. Before we get to the Peace Corps portion of this, Barb, tell me a little about your background, where you grew up and what kind of person you were, and did you have any plans, that kind of thing.
Yes, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and I, in my circle in suburbia Dallas, the Peace Corps was really not thought of. It was thought of in the sense of running away with the circus. So that somewhat inhibited my initial application to the Peace Corps. But growing up, my father always read National Geographic. And I recall one time I said, Dad, I really love National Geographic, and someday it would be wonderful to work for the National Geographic. I was just 10 years old. And he said, well, why couldn't you? So I think that just that one statement he said, why couldn't you, instilled in me the idea that I could go out and see the world.
Wow, at the age of 10, you said?
Yeah, I think I was about 10 years old.
Huh. Did you get any good feedback from your mother, your siblings?
No, if anything, it was a little bit on the negative side in my mind, because I had a great aunt named Georgie who actually did run away with the circus. And she was always thought of as somewhat selfish because she left her family and traveled with the circus.
Interesting. Uh-huh. Were you friends with her?
I knew her. I met her a few times, but not close. I always wanted her circus trunk when she passed away, but it got lost in the shuffle. So don't know what happened to it.
Well, so you're thinking about National Geographic, but certainly not the Peace Corps.
No, just that adventurous spark was ignited, I think.
Okay. Where did you go to college?
I went to college at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. And I recall my first 4 years there, receiving my bachelor's degree. The initial 2 years I was kind of lost in the shuffle, being such a large university. But the last 2 years, I settled into a small department called the Wildlife and Fishery Sciences.
Oh, okay. Why that?
I loved animals. I initially started college in pre-vet, but working for a couple of veterinarians, I decided I did not want to work only with domestic animals, nor did I want to work with only injured and sick animals. So I had no idea before attending Texas A&M that there existed a Department of Wildlife and Fishery Sciences.
And so was it your idea to get a degree, an appropriate degree, and then apply to that department?
Initially, I wanted to work with whales, of all things,
Ooh, wow.
because through my encounters at Texas A&M, I worked for a professor who worked for the veterinary science. He was a professor of veterinary sciences, of anatomy, and he had received his PhD studying whales in Alaska. And
Wow.
he became a mentor to me, and I still keep in touch with him today. And through him, I became part of what was called the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network and a love of marine mammals.
Okay. So, what did you do after you graduated from Texas
After I
A&M?
graduated, yes, Peace Corps was not in my mind yet.
What? Oh, by the way, what year did you graduate?
I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 1984.
That leads me to think that you have more than one degree.
Right.
The way
I
you
went
put it.
back to Texas A&M and received a master's degree in, it's called, it's an education degree of ecology, basically. But
Okay.
basically it's teaching in schools, in zoos, and nature centers about wildlife, animals, the benefits, and conservation, the importance of conservation. So it was called conservation education. But I received that degree in 1988.
Okay. So the first one in 84,
Uh-huh,
the master's in 88.
correct.
Okay. Any thought of Peace Corps at this point?
No, I had traveled to Florida, lived in Washington, D.C., worked at an animal rehab center, worked at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and then I worked at the Pocono Environmental Education Center in Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. And after that, I decided I wasn't quite sure what, those were internships, short-term positions. I wasn't quite clear what I wanted to do. So I went back to Texas A&M and worked on my master's degree. And it was during that time I had a course in conservation biology, and we discussed the country of Cameroon. And I thought I would like to explore that country, and that led to looking up the Peace Corps. And then I saw,
How did that lead to looking up the Peace Corps? I don't get it.
I think actually I had an interest. The interest was there, but on the bulletin board was a Peace Corps flyer.
On the
And I
bulletin
saw
board
that.
in 88?
Yeah,
Okay.
87, 88.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that there. And we didn't have the internet,
You
so
couldn't look it up.
you couldn't look it up. So I
Mhm.
just called. I can't remember. Oh, the phone number was on that little, it was actually a card on the bulletin board in Nagel Hall at Texas A&M, which was the home of the Wildlife and Fishery Sciences Department. And I called, and they sent me an application, which was a very long application.
Several pages?
Yes, several pages. You had to have 8 references.
Did you think at this point that's pretty presumptuous of Peace Corps, me reaching out initially and they inundate you with a huge application?
Well, I felt they were very selective at the time, and it did initially, make me take a step back, but it also made me realize what a responsibility it was going to be, and to take it very seriously. It wasn't joining the circus in the sense that was thought of it in the mindset of the time. In
Yeah.
my circle of family, yes.
Did you know anybody at this point who'd ever been in Peace Corps?
No one.
Did it occur to you that you could contact Peace Corps and find out that there might be some RPCVs around you that you could talk to?
Not at the time. Not at the time.
I know it's a different age back
It's a
then.
different age.
Yeah.
Today, totally different. Yes, yes. Today
Absolutely.
you could.
Yeah. So you filled out that application.
I did.
And go ahead. What'd you think of it? Of the application, and did you think it was thorough, that they were really doing a good job of?
I did. I did. I remember having to have 3 interviews. I visited the office in Dallas. They had a regional office in Dallas. And I recall fear. At the time, you had to fill out the application, contact 8 references, which I did, and put it in the mailbox. And I hesitated. That was the last step. And
Why'd you hesitate?
well, first of all, I think the reaction of my parents.
What was the reaction, by the way? That's a good question.
Yeah. So my mother said, "Why would you want to do that?" And then later on, they asked, well, there's so many honorable nonprofits and assistance organizations and needs in the United States. Why would you want to go abroad? And fortunately, at the time, I had the presence of mind to say, well, yes, there are. And that is true. And I have done my part. I've done a lot already. But this is for me. A part of it is for me. I will be honest. I want to explore the world a little bit. And so my father was, I don't recall him saying much at all, but at that point, I was still afraid. And it was a professor, and his name was Dr. Doug Slack, in the Wildlife and Fishery Sciences Department. And I went to him, and I recall saying, "Oh, Dr. Slack, I really want to do something international." And I kept, for some reason, there was a big fear, a big hesitation to join the Peace Corps. Again, considering my background, joining the Peace Corps was not, I knew no one that had joined the Peace Corps. And I recall him saying, "Well, why don't you do it?" And it actually made me cry. I remember I was
Really? Huh.
26, 27 at the time, and I'll never forget that, because I felt you know how you are back then, and I felt a little ashamed, like, well, why don't I? And it was the best advice anyone has ever given me. I wish I could go back and hug him, because it is what gave me the courage, literally, to put that application, it was probably, legal, in a mailbox. And I remember doing that. Yeah.
Was just him asking, well, why don't you? Come on.
What's holding you back?
Yeah.
It was so fun. I didn't, anyway.
Anyway, he didn't try to convince you beyond that. That's all he had to say?
That's all he had to say. Well, why don't you? Nobody's stopping you. And I thought, in my mind, I had built up these voices saying, shouldn't do it, shouldn't do it. So I'm thankful he did.
Okay, so you put the application in the mail. How long was it before you heard anything from Peace Corps, and what did that consist of? Phone call? What?
If I recall correctly, it took some time.
Weeks?
Months.
Months? Oh, yeah.
And it was at least 6 months before I had my initial interview. There was one reference that
That's a long time.
It had a small question about, your references have to answer questions in honesty, do you
Yeah.
think this person can live in a third world country?
Uh-huh.
And I think one of my references had said something along the lines of probably and not sure. And I actually had to visit a psychiatrist to establish that I was of the mindset that I was strong enough, that I wasn't, that I
Did the
was ready.
Peace Corps require you to go see a psychiatrist
did.
who
Yes.
would then give them his or her opinion?
Yes, they did.
Huh.
They sure did.
And did you have to pay for that?
No, I think they did.
Oh,
I think
okay.
they did pay for that.
Were you also aware that FBI was checking out Barb Reid?
Well, considering my father was an FBI agent, it had crossed. Not at that point, it hadn't, but later on, I thought about it. Yes.
Did you know that they were doing it?
No.
No, I did.
Did you really?
Yeah, neighbors told me the FBI called on us the other day about you, and I was shocked.
Oh,
FBI?
yeah. Well, yeah, they need to do a thorough background check, and I really am all for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. All right, so you passed muster, apparently.
I passed muster.
And you got an interview. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And where was the interview? Who did it? What was that like?
So I had taken a position at the Wyo Ranch near Kerrville, Texas, which is west of San Antonio. The Wyo Ranch had a program for. They had a lot of exotic game on the ranch, and so they set up a program so that school could come visit, and we were hired to teach these school children about these animals, conservation, and it was called the Adventure Camp.
Uh-huh.
So I was working at the Wyo Ranch, and I lived in a little hut. It was a house, but it was an old house. And it was basically in the middle of this huge ranch. And I recall I had one phone line going to the house, or one line of electricity. So I was away from, and I got this call from a woman in Dallas for my interview. And I could barely hear her. In fact, I remember just laying on the floor, squeezing the phone up to my ear to hear her. And one of my concerns, I recall her asking if I had any concerns, and I was concerned because, again, my father had been an FBI, he was retired, but an FBI agent, and so I was aware of safety issues. And being a female, I was concerned mostly about rape.
Uh-huh.
And so I asked her, I said, have there ever been any females raped in the Peace Corps, and what kinds of safety measures do you provide?
Uh-huh.
And she was honest, and she said, yes, there had been, but in Peace Corps, we give you a lot of information. We provide safety in the sense of, as long as you conduct yourself in a responsible way, that it is very unlikely. And that's what she said. Mm-hmm. So she was
just
honest.
The right answer.
Yes, it
like.
was.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how long was the interview?
About 30 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. And what did they tell you at the end of the interview?
She just said that we will be in contact. And
did you ask, what are my chances? What do you think my chances are based on everything you know about me? Or did you not?
No, I didn't. I didn't ask that very question. But Yeah, so that was
But
it.
6 months had gone by since you put the application in the mail.
That's
And then
correct.
you had your interview. What happened next?
Well, I decided to venture away from the Whale Ranch. I had been there long enough, and I had I was an adventurous soul, so I traveled up to Seattle and I took a
Wow.
position as a foreign fisheries biologist. And that program lasted 6 months. I knew that. It was just a short-term assignment. And I was very interested and it paid well. So I knew that Peace Corps was not going to, I knew I would have to wait a while, but I didn't want to take a position that was long-term.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
this was the best bet for me.
So Peace Corps was still uppermost in your mind.
Oh, yes.
That's what you wanted to do. Okay.
Yes.
All right. When did you finally get the word?
I was in Seattle and I received a phone call and they offered me a position in Belize. And the bolder part of me, which I still to this day, this was the best decision I made, was I said, well, my three goals to enter the Peace Corps, my primary goals are to help in another country, to learn another language,
Mm-hmm.
and to be of service. I can't recall exactly. I think that's about what it was. But having that second goal of wanting to learn a second language, I knew that Belize is an English speaking country. So I said, well, I would rather not go to Belize. I would rather go to a country where I can learn a new language.
Yeah.
And the woman on the phone said, well, usually we advise that the recipient take the country we offer. And it usually lowers your chances of getting in. But on the same conversation, she said, I just happen to have a position in Guatemala. And I jumped on that
Oh,
one. I
huh.
was so excited. And I said, I would love it.
Now, what at that point did you know about Guatemala?
I knew it was Spanish speaking. I knew,
Did you know where it was?
I did. I did. I knew it was close to Belize, yes.
Did you know any Guatemalans? Did you know the name of any?
No, I did not. Other than that, I knew nothing.
You didn't know history?
I did
Nothing.
not.
Okay. All you knew is that they spoke Spanish, and hey, that's what I want.
Yes. And I have to admit, for some reason, I was the youngest of three, and I felt my parents were older, and I felt a little guilty leaving them. And Guatemala was not so far away.
Yeah.
So that was another benefit in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Looking back, I think it was sort of silly. But anyway, that was my mindset.
So when was this that you had this conversation, that you accepted an assignment in Guatemala?
I think it was 1989, 1989, getting close to 1990.
Okay. And then when did you actually go to?
June of 1990.
All right. The next thing I want to ask you about is training. And the training I had, what I've learned, is very different than the training that other people have had. So I don't presume I know what your training was like.
Yeah.
Where was it? What was the duration of it? How many were there? That kind of thing.
So I was initially placed in the what they call the environmental education program, and our training lasted 3 months and was divided into 3 parts. It was divided into language taught by only Spanish speakers. It was cultural, and then your technical areas. So those 3
Yeah.
parts.
And Where was this?
Yes, location, it was located between Antigua, Guatemala and Guatemala City in a beautiful area.
A
Yes.
rural area?
Yes, rural.
Okay. Is that where Peace Corps usually trained?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it became the training site for many years.
Oh, okay. All right. And how many were you?
In total, our
In your
training
group?
in my group about 7.
Oh, okay.
But in the total training class, we were about 30.
Okay. So you were in environmental, and then there were
The
volunteers
fisheries
doing other
program, the health program. Yes, there were other programs.
things. Okay. How would you characterize your training program?
Excellent, excellent. We lived with families in the area, and these families were paid, and I walked to and from my family's home each day to the training site. And the family took very good care of me.
Did they speak English?
Not at all.
And you didn't speak Spanish?
I spoke very little. I had 2 years of Spanish in high school, but it was mostly, my teacher wasn't even native Spanish speaker. We just learned the days of the week, the months of the year. So I knew a little. I knew the sounds growing up in Texas, so I can't deny that. But yes, we just started off with smiling. And they would point to things, and I would say, gracias, and they were just so kind to me.
Do you feel like, Barb, that you had a facility for language, learning the language? Some people don't.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I did. We were in our Spanish class, I would say at least minimum 2 hours a day. 5 days a week. We went home. I recall studying because along the road I walked, there were other Peace Corps volunteers in my training group, and we would study the verbs together and really work on it. But again, I was immersed in it, and I do think that facilitated it tremendously, learning the language. And then our groups, we would study Spanish for 2 hours a day. We were in groups of 5, and our teacher, even though our teacher spoke no English, the other members in my group did. So if I didn't understand something or someone else did, one person in the group of 5 would get it. And they would explain. So we helped each other.
And it was, I guess, quite clear to you that you had to learn it. There was no other way.
Correct. Yes.
If you were going to function,
That's
do your
right.
job, interact with people, that's the way to do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I guess you could see that you were making steady progress in the
I
language.
was. I was not as quick to grasp the language as other volunteers, but I was also not the slowest. So I would say the older volunteers did struggle more, but they really bent over backwards to help you in every way, shape, or form.
In my group, there was a deselection process. Did you have that during training?
Deselection, no.
You don't even know what that is, do you?
Yes, I know what the word means, but we had people that decided during training. I'd say we lost a third of our group.
And how many did you say there were?
About 30.
30?
I would say
So
that.
you lost 10?
And these were people that
Wow.
decided during training. A couple of them had boyfriends and they missed them. I would say 3. Yeah. So I'd say a third left, and 3 of the 10 that left just decided they didn't want to be away for 2 years from their. They had, because the selection process was so long, it took so long. Life went on, And these people often met significant
Sure.
others during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So they left, and then a couple left just they were not made out for the program. They realized that, and they just decided to early. We called it early termination. ET.
Mm-hmm.
They ET'd. It became a verb.
Okay. But Peace Corps didn't kick anybody out.
Not at that time. No.
Okay. So at the end of the 3 months, you were set to go to your assignment.
Yes.
And you felt like you could do it language-wise. What about technical?
I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure. It was the environmental program left a lot to the individual to get it established. Now, I did have a Guatemalan counterpart who helped me a lot. He found my housing, he set up everything. So I can't, he was a big help, but it was still a very nebulous program.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What were you going to be doing? Did you have a clear understanding when you left training? You were going to some other place and you were going to do what?
Initially, I was to go into the schools, the local schools, and talk about environmental education.
Talk about it. Recruit? Would that be too strong?
Children. Yeah, recruit would be too strong. It was more along the lines of go into the schools and talk about local nature, talk about animals, the importance of animals, the importance of, I don't recall it being very environmental in the sense, we have to take care of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult because once I went into the schools, I saw that these children all came from impoverished homes, and some more than others. And it was difficult to talk about something that was so remote in their minds. So I really, the schools were run differently, and it was I didn't have quite the confidence I needed to just step in and do it.
Uh-huh.
So I did end up changing programs.
Because you thought that you weren't doing it as well as you could for their benefit, or what?
I really just felt I couldn't do it. I saw a program that was better established, and another volunteer in my area, it was the forestry program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was well established. It had a clear outline of what the volunteer was to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I felt more equipped, even though I had no background in forestry.
Mm-hmm.
I felt more equipped to jump into that program. And so I made my case to Peace Corps. And back then, we called them APCDs. The person in the Peace Corps office that was in charge of, there was an APCD, forgotten what it stands for, but in charge of each program, the forestry program, the fisheries program, the environmental program. There was someone there who was in charge of those programs. And I made my case to both the director of the wildlife science environmental program and the forestry program of what I could do. And
Mm-hmm.
I really provided a good argument why I wanted to change.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. They gladly changed. They said, well, go for it. And
You didn't meet any resistance from the one whose
maybe a
department you
little.
were in.
Yeah, and I felt a little guilty because Renate, he was the name of my Guatemalan counterpart. I felt a little guilty because he had tried as best he could to kind of establish the environmental program. And in about 2 or 3 training groups after mine, a Peace Corps volunteer did step into that role, and so Renate did get a volunteer, so that was good. And then I did flourish in my program, in the forestry program.
Forestry.
Yeah, I loved it.
Do you need to take a break now?
I think I'm all right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm right there in my mind.
Oh, all right. How long were you a part of the environmental program before you changed?
You mean after training?
Yes, right.
Probably a month.
Oh, a quick decision on your part.
Yes, it was a quick decision.
Oh, that sounds really good.
It was.
It wasn't prolonged, Dan, and I can do this, and
No, it wasn't prolonged.
yeah, okay. I think that's probably another reason why they were quick to approve your request.
Yeah.
Because you saw it, you knew right away that.
And they knew me by that time. I had been through 3 months of training. They knew I was serious about what I was going to do.
But this meant also that you were going to have to change where you lived, right?
It was in the same area. So, yes, it did. Renate had set up a house in a small town, which I kept throughout
this
the
is the
2
first
years.
place.
Yes.
Okay.
And it had electricity.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
Okay.
It didn't have hot water or anything like that, but it had electricity. It was in a small town called Chantla. And
How do you spell that?
Chiantla. Chantla. Near a larger town called Huehuetenango. And Huehuetenango was the department capital.
Okay. What was about the population of your first town?
The town?
Yeah.
Probably about 2,000.
What do the people do there? Farmers?
Yeah, primarily farmers. There were school teachers that lived in the town. Had a town square, a beautiful church. I remember it. A lot of people would travel to this church to visit. It had some sort of, they believed the Virgin Mary had some sort of healing powers at this Catholic church. What else did they do in Chantla? Yes, there were farmers, school teachers.
Were you near the coast?
No, I was in the mountains of Guatemala.
Ah.
So I was in the mountains of Guatemala, yes.
Would it get cold at night?
Yes, it did.
What was your elevation?
At this point, probably about 6,000 feet.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Higher than Denver.
Yes.
Yeah. Huh.
But then my future site was even higher, which we could get to. Yeah.
Okay. How was it living in that town? Did you just live there for a month after training was over?
So I lived there for a month after training, and then, initially I had to Renate helped me buy a bed. It had to be made. I remember the bed was handmade.
Huh.
I had to buy how I was going to wash my clothes. You washed your clothes. The house was in the shape of a U with a little courtyard in the middle. So when it rained right in the middle. It had 3 little rooms and a pila, which was a big sink. Everybody in Guatemala has access to a pila, P-I-L-A, where they wash their clothes. So I lived there, and then 2 more volunteers joined me, and we split the rent.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. lived in your house with you?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
They were volunteers in the area.
Uh-huh. Um, we were made to live with families. You
Yeah.
had to live with families. Was there any volunteers who lived with families that you knew of in Guatemala?
No.
No.
No, everybody had their own house. They had to find, some had to find, but they always had help finding a place to live. But they, unless they really, I suppose they could have lived with the family if they wanted to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but most did not.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's see. How did you get paid? How'd that work?
We were paid, they just automatically, we each had an account set up in the Bank of Guatemala, which had branches. One branch was in Huehuetenango, and they would just deposit money into our accounts. We'd go to the bank and just pull out whatever cash we needed. But we paid everything in cash.
Yeah, pesos.
No, they were
No?
called quetzales.
Oh,
In Guatemala, the national bird is called the quetzal, and it is endangered, but it's a beautiful bird that lives in the rainforest, and they admire it, and so they named their monetary quetzales. So you paid in quetzales.
mm-hmm. Okay. Now, when you left that community after a month, how far away from that community did you move?
So then, it was from you would travel on a small bus down a hill to Huehuetenango, which is 5 minutes. And then in Huehuetenango, you boarded a bus. We called them chicken buses because they were basically just school buses that had been donated, I guess, from the United States. Some of them even had things like Houston Independent School District still written on the side. And you would take that bus from short for Huehuetenango, we called it Huehue, to San Sebastian Ache. There were 2 San Sebastians in the department of Huehuetenango, so we called it San Sebastian Ache, H. And that was about a 30-minute ride.
Mm-hmm.
So not too far. Then San Sebastian was a smaller town, maybe 500 people. From there, I hiked up to a small village in the mountains, into a little village town called Chejoj. Chejoj, Chejoj.
Why did you go there?
Because the program was called a watershed management program. And so volunteers in the forestry department would take responsibility of a different watershed, which would include a river and the valley and the little villages that were located within the valley. So Chejoj was probably the largest village and the closest to San Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I hiked up to Chejoj, it took me 4 hours.
Gosh.
I got it down to 2 hours, so that shows you. But it was uphill the whole way along a little trail. You had to cross, no joke, a rope bridge. Initially a rope bridge. Oh my gosh, to cross the little river and hike up into the village.
Wow. Did they know you were coming?
Yes and no. I did have another volunteer who hiked up with me because we worked in 2 watersheds which were close, 2 river valleys close to each other, and in the villages, it was very remote. There had not been another Peace Corps volunteer before. In retrospect, I do recall a story about a volunteer who had been in the area. It's just a very remote story, and it may have even been a rumor.
Mm-hmm.
But I had heard that he or she had passed away, had died.
While serving?
Yeah, it was because he or she had hiked at night, and this was a very steep incline, and if you walked off the trail, you could fall down a slippery slope into
Canyon?
yeah, a small canyon.
Wow.
So, and once I got up there, and I did have the other volunteer's name was Mike, and we decided to live. It was better to live up in the village than initially they wanted us to live in San Sebastian, because San Sebastian was a town, and it did have electricity. It was a small town. But we looked for a place to live, but that hike was going to be, and the work was really, it was establishing the primary goal. Well, one of the primary goals was to establish tree nurseries, small little tree nurseries in the valley. There were in that particular river valley there were 4 villages, and so to set up tree nurseries in that river valley, and then to reforest that area with these small trees you grew to hold the soil up in the areas up. The trees were to hold the soil for these farmers who are trying to live, just survive. And so that was and we did work with the Guatemalan Forestry Department. It was the program was established by CARE International that paid for, I think, the primary, but also we had a counterpart that did not live in the area. He lived in Guatemala or Huehuetenango, I can't recall, but he was in the forestry department. So I will say we had a Guatemalan counterpart. Yeah.
Who planted the trees?
That would be us along with the villagers, but that
villagers
came along
helped.
much later. Oh yes, yeah.
Did they know what the benefits of these trees were?
Well, that was part of our job, was to explain. The tree nurseries had been started by Dijabos, and Dijabos was the Guatemalan Forestry Department. I don't recall what, it's an acronym for something.
Okay.
And they had started these small tree nurseries in the villages, but these villages were very remote, no electricity, no running water, and they were indigenous people who spoke, the women and children spoke no Spanish. They spoke a Mayan language called MAM, M-A-M.
Wow.
So initially when Mike and I hiked up by ourselves into the villages, we noticed that there were no women and children to speak of. There was a schoolhouse, and we just slept on, a bench in the schoolhouse.
Wow.
And then we hiked back down to San Sebastian all in the same day. It was rough. It was a hike, but again, I was up for the task. I was so motivated. I loved it. This is what I dreamed of.
Mm-hmm.
Not all Peace Corps assignments are like this, but this is what I wanted, and so this was my dream.
I can understand. What I'm having trouble with, though, is in these little villages of indigenous people who didn't speak the language you did, how did you communicate?
Well, initially, we didn't. The women and children hid from us. The men would approach us, and they had traveled.
Oh, that's a cultural thing, right?
They were afraid because they thought, again, we were the first white people. We were white.
Yeah.
They had seen, and they had a lot of, what's the word I'm thinking of, superstitions. That white people, it was very, very strong superstitions that white people would steal children, indigenous children.
Wow.
Take them, these stories are wild.
Yeah.
Take these children back to the United States for their organs.
For their organs. Wow.
There was another...
How did you learn this? How did you learn? Did somebody in the village tell you this, or was this just known about Guatemala in general, that there are people who live here who believe this?
That story, yeah, that's a good question, because I had to think back on that. That story was somewhat known. We were told, when you go up into these villages, in fact, we were advised not to live in the village. Peace Corps wanted us to stay for safety reasons in the town, but it was just so difficult.
Did Peace Corps give you the impression at all, or did they tell you that they might even kill you because you're this white person who might be up to no good?
They told us that they did not come right out and say they would kill us, but they told us that there were superstitions, and that if we were to always be present, meaning if we lived there or if we were there for the night, to always keep our windows open, that they should know exactly what we were doing, that they were watching us, and that literally there were women that thought we would concoct a brew of sorts, and that this brew, that we would be witches. We could be witches, and this brew would sterilize their women. And
that would be your intent with the brew?
Yeah. So initially, that is where the fear came from. Were these stories and the adoption trade, being so close to the United States. So there's always, an ounce of truth to some of this, but...
When you say adoption, what do you mean?
So there were Americans that would adopt Guatemalan children, and...
Because it was easy and cheap?
It was a lucrative trade. Americans would pay good money to adopt children, and a lawyer could make a lot of money to provide the paperwork. And I do not know this for sure, but in my mind, the indigenous people had large families, and I can see a lawyer justifying, this family won't miss one child.
Oh, yeah.
And these children are desperately poor. This child will have a better life in the United States. And I could see it happening. So it may have happened. And then the story just got larger and larger. And it spread throughout all the indigenous communities in Guatemala. So not so many years later, it came to a head, and an American was killed over this very issue.
It seems like I think I lost my train of thought.
Well, I might jump in and just say what we did to establish trust. I would say the better part of our first year in Chejo, living there, was to gain the trust, especially of the women and children. The men would talk to us in Spanish. They had traveled to sugar farms and learned Spanish. So we just lived in they had a newer schoolhouse, and the teachers would come up and down the mountain and stay the week and then go back to their families. And through that, and we'd play soccer or football, as they called it, with the school children. And through that, then the children would get to know us, and they loved us, and they would play and laugh. And through the children, they would go home and tell their parents, hey, these people are okay. It took the better part of a year. We had village meetings at night, where we would talk, and we would speak Spanish, and then that would have to be translated to Mom. We had a man that lived in Chejo named Santiago. He was fluent in Spanish and Mom. He lived in the village, and he he was responsible for us. And Francisco, what am I saying? Francisco loved the man, and he would translate to Mom. So we did take some lessons in Mom, I might add. Mom is a very, very different language, and I was 28 when I started. And learning Spanish was one thing, but Mom, I couldn't literally not hear all the sounds. Mom is a very guttural sounding language, and I've been told like 6K sounds in your throat, and I could. My teacher would say, "Barbara, say this," and I would say it, and she'd say, "No, say this," and I said, "But I just said that," and she said, "No, you didn't." So literally, I couldn't hear all the sounds, but I did learn some Mom. I could count to 10. I could ask for eggs. I could do some.
It's important to show you're interested.
It is very important to show your interest, and I think the women especially took a liking to me. I started a little side project, which many Peace Corps volunteers, they see the need, and the side project helped me especially. We started a little vegetable garden, and the women got to know me through that, and
was that because they didn't have many vegetables in these little communities?
They had some, but it had become over the years more of a monoculture. The Mayan people, I felt like I was teaching them what their ancestors already knew. So in a roundabout way,
wow.
I was teaching, yes. So, but over time, corn was the primary product, and it was the cash crop. It was what they could make some money from. So everything, it became so monoculture. And then of course corn, to get rid of your once you had the fruit and taken the fruit, then they would do a slash and burn to get rid of, instead of starting compost piles. So,
yeah.
So
did you try to convince them that slash and burn was not?
Yeah, that was one of my projects. And so, yeah, I would say soil conservation was so setting up the tree, or continuing to take care of the tree nurseries, talking about how to make a good compost pile was a big project. And I would travel, each day I would hike to a different village, and we would talk about how to build a compost pile. We would make a compost pile. Then I would establish individual plans of work with different farmers, and we would look at their plot of land and what it needed. And oftentimes, because we were at a steep slope, up at about 9,000 feet at this point, so we were in a cloud forest.
Yeah.
And it was very cold, and often the clouds would come up the valley, and it was very cold. So the hardest project was to set up terracing.
Terraces?
Terraces. And to establish that, you needed an A level. This is me. I had to bring this picture of me. I'm working with one of the village women, and we can pause if you need to. And,
okay, I see it
and
now.
if you notice, she has a baby on her back.
Yes.
And we have a wooden A level, is what it's called. We made it. And that way you could plant along the contour of the slope. And that was a very big deal. What we are doing is really just establishing the slope in order to plant our vegetable garden. Yeah.
Was there anybody in the village that wasn't quite sure that you knew what you were doing?
Oh, yes.
Look, she's just a young girl, a white young girl from
Oh,
America.
yeah. They would ask me, why would you choose to leave and come? They asked me lots of questions, but at one point, I did go down back down to San Sebastian and into Huehuetenango, and we had meetings in at the training program. They would halfway through we had a reconnect, got together again. Anyway, through those programs, I had to leave for a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks, and come back. And one time I actually even had to fly back to Dallas. I was from Dallas because my father got sick.
Oh.
And the Peace Corps director called me into his office. My father was very ill, and he said he had a 50-50 chance.
Wow.
So Peace Corps paid for me to fly back to Dallas. So in one day, I saw a hospital in Huehuetenango which had no nurses. It was filthy dirty. Patients had no dignity. To a hospital, I flew to Dallas, which was a 3-hour flight, to a hospital with carpeted floors. It was just, changing from one culture to another. But I came back, and a rumor had spread that I was planting marijuana. Was it marijuana or was it poppy, or I was trying to profit through the drug trade.
And that's why you had left?
Right, correct. That I was coming back, and that my intentions truly were to, because they literally could not understand why would I leave the land of golden streets, because in their minds, one of their first questions was, how much is a ticket to the United States? And how much does a farmer make in the United States? Because they were curious.
Did many people express desire to leave as soon as they could to come to the
They
United
never
States?
actually came out and said that. The furthest they got was how much do farmers make in the United States, and of course I didn't know.
Yeah.
I just came up with what was a minimum wage, and of course that was a lot more than they could ever make. A lot more. And they were subsistence level living people. They literally ate what they could plant.
Was there any starvation?
No, I will say that. In my area, they were not starving people, and they were not unhappy people. They had a strong sense of community. And I saw that in our town meetings. They helped one another. And
No, that's great.
it was wonderful.
So there were probably no gangs in your area at all?
No gangs.
You never heard of a gang in your...
The only time
where
I
you
really
were.
felt in danger was one time, and this was my fault. A woman came carrying loads of firewood on her back. And I wanted a picture. I wanted a picture of her so badly. So
Yeah.
I took a picture, and she didn't know Spanish, so she kept walking up the hill. But I later heard from somebody else that she had said to me that she was going to come visit me and slice me up with her machete. Because I had
Because you took that
stolen
picture?
her soul.
Oh, wow.
And then others thought, with good reason, that we would take the photos and then sell them for profit back in the United States, which did happen. That would happen. Not volunteers, not Peace Corps
PCVs.
volunteers. No, not Peace Corps volunteers, no. So the proper way to do that would be, as we were taught in training, in our cultural program, if you took a picture, you were to ask permission. And they might say no.
Yeah, and then you wouldn't take it.
Right, because they didn't know what a photo was. They thought they thought the photo would steal their soul. Some did. Yeah.
About how many photos did you come back with? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
I did take a lot of photos.
With a good camera?
Yeah, I had a Canon camera.
Okay.
So I did have a decent camera, and I loved taking pictures. So after I had been there a while, Mike and I were asked, the people, they had no way of seeing what they looked like. A few of them had little mirrors in their house, but they wanted a photo of their family. So we offered, because we wanted photos of them.
Sure.
So we went around and offered, in exchange for taking their photo and photos of the village and people in it and such, that we would develop the pictures and give them a photo of their family. And we did that.
They must have loved that.
They
right?
loved it. And I think that took place probably, again, 9 months, 10 months into our program there.
Yeah. How did you get film developed there?
Oh, you could go into Huehuetenango and develop film there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it was old school. You had to develop it, and they had most of your basics in Huehuetenango. In fact, one of the stores I recall, you could even buy peanut butter.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So you were there in that community for at least a year?
2 years. Yeah.
2 years. Mm-hmm. The whole time except for the first month?
I was.
Okay. You didn't do anything different. You continued your assignment.
That's right. I had I had a couple of 2 women's side projects, and in Cheho, I planted the vegetable garden, and I taught them how to make bread one time, which was hilarious.
How do you make bread when you don't have an oven?
So they did. They had these. So eventually, I lived in an old schoolhouse, which we had. The new schoolhouse, was used. So, but they had a smaller old schoolhouse, which was just sitting there. It was just 2 rooms. This is in Cheho, the village, but the schools up in the villages always had a room for the teacher to live. Mm-hmm. Because they were so remote. Teachers usually came from afar and would live the week there and then go home and come back. So the schoolhouse had a room, but the room was covered probably in 6 inches of bat guano when we first entered. So these little, and of course I love animals, so it didn't, yes, we had to empty it of the bat guano, but we knew enough that, hey, bat guano is good compost, so that was a teachable moment. But the little bats kept wanting to come back, but we finally got them to find homes elsewhere, and got a bed up there, Peace Corps issued us propane stoves. I paid Francisco, I think, to carry up the propane gas tank. He carried it up on his back, the way they carried everything, so with a strap across their forehead, and they would carry it on their back with most of the weight on their forehead and neck, and hike it up. So I had a propane stove. I would hike down once a week to San Sebastian, and they always had a market. You could buy all kinds of vegetables, and I really ate very healthily up there. I'd say very healthily.
So you didn't lose weight?
I did not. And hiking, no, I did not lose weight. I can honestly say I ate healthier there than I eat here, probably. Because I had tomatoes and onions and rice and tortillas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you ever have an earthquake there? I understand
did.
They have earthquakes in Guatemala.
Yeah, the first earthquake I felt was during training, and that was in an area. So yes, Guatemala has many volcanoes, active volcanoes. I hiked up an active volcano. That's a whole nother story, but
I want to hear that story
oh
too.
Goodness. And yes, I did feel it. I was asleep, and I felt the shaking. I was dreaming that it was my family dog shaking at the end of the bed. But it didn't cause any major damage. But the teachers that taught our Spanish classes remembered, I believe the major earthquake occurred in 1986. There was a major earthquake. And all of those teachers had family members that had been hurt or even died in this particular earthquake. Now, up in the village, I don't recall feeling an earthquake, but I do recall feeling an earthquake.
Okay.
Yes.
And you weren't a part of any other natural disaster, floods, fires, anything like that?
No. And after gaining the trust of the people, they watched over me. And can I tell how I quelched the rumor of that we planted marijuana?
Yes, go right ahead.
So what Mike and I did, and I was fortunate to have Mike, because it was a very remote site, and I recognized it living by myself was just going to be too difficult. And Peace Corps was all about, yes, stay safe. So Mike and I came up with the idea that we would visit each village and talk. We actually found out who started the rumor. It was a woman in my women's group, and she apologized later. But we visited each village, and we gave a special charla or talk about why we were there. And they were allowed to ask us any question they wanted. And we also, these are villages that had no electricity again. So we had a local man, a very strong indigenous man. Now these people, I'm 5'4". These people were about, at the most, 5'1". So I'm the Jolly Green Giant. I wish I had my picture of me but anyway. So I was very tall, and I was considered the woman who works like a man. So we had a man that did hike up a generator. And we, at the German embassy in Guatemala City, we obtained some films about nature. And so it was kind of a treat to go up to visit the villages and bring this generator and show a film.
Sure.
So we met up there, and we did that. And we showed the film at night on the side of a schoolhouse, just a white wall. And the film, I recall, one of them had projected on the wall of the schoolhouse insects. But of course, the insects being projected on the wall of the school were about 5 feet tall. And they asked me, they said, "Are there really insects that large?" Oh my goodness, it was so precious. I don't even mean, they had no idea. So it was just so amazing to me. And then after we did that, and it was quite a lot of hiking with the generator to many villages, very remote locations. But they really appreciated that.
Sure, absolutely.
And we quelched that rumor. And after that...
Well, how did you quelch the rumor, though? Did you just deny it? Did you just
Well,
say
we talked about what
true?
we were there for, and the local Guatemalan that with Francisco, who's lived in Chejo. I think everybody knew Francisco. He was a very trusted individual, a very kind individual. And I think through him, they trusted us. He trusted us, so they trusted us. And the lady that had started the rumor just sort of said, and I see you're looking at your watch, but
no, I don't even have a watch.
Oh, I'm sorry, but anyway, she apologized, and it was after that I was able to. And Mike ended up having to leave early, and I was by myself, and it was scary hiking up by myself.
What do you mean he had to leave early?
He had to leave a little early, just a few months early. The service, was a commitment of 2 years.
Yeah.
He found out his father had leukemia.
Oh, is that why he left?
So he needed to. His mother asked him to leave early, and so he left. Yeah, about 2 months early, not very early. And hiking up was scary to me. I hadn't realized how scary and remote. It was very quiet up in the villages, just so different. And hiking up by myself is a bit unnerving. It took some confidence,
Sure.
and yet I felt eyes were upon me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that
I know
I
that
will
feeling.
say, yeah, the fishbowl effect, yes,
Mm-hmm.
is very true. They are watching you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yet after that, word spreads, I felt they watched me, but they were taking care of me.
Yeah.
If I had fallen on the trail and hurt myself, I think somebody would have come to help me and carry me down.
Absolutely, they would have. Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you do on weekends? More of the same?
Weekends, I would hike down to the local village. I would hike down to San Sebastian to go to the market and just resupply with food, because I had to carry my food up to my side. You couldn't really. The
Wow.
only things you could. There was a little tienda store up in the site, but they only sold rice and pasta, a few eggs, because everybody had eggs up there. So you could hike that up, but
And when you say hike up, did you mean 2,000 feet?
yeah, it was about I think.
Wow.
I do not know that for sure, but from San Sebastian up to Cheho, I think we hiked somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 feet.
How long would it take you to go from your town down to the larger one?
So going downhill, we got to the point we could practically jog it. But again, it was steep and you had to be careful because it was a trail and you could slip on the gravel, but it would take about an hour to hike down.
And then it would take more to come back up.
We got it when we were in shape, we could do it. It got to be kind of a challenge how fast we could hike up. The first time we hiked up, it took 4 hours.
Yeah,
But we got
right.
it down to 2-hour hike. So it was a hike.
Boy.
Carrying a load. So when you went to the market, you had to consider the fact, okay, do I want 3 onions or do I just want to carry 2? Because onions
Yeah.
carry a lot, weigh a
Sure.
lot. So you would
Sure.
have to consider what you could hike up.
Did you ever think about having somebody that you knew in the town go with you so that they could carry some of your stuff for you? And you wouldn't be sneaky about it. You just tell them.
I could have. I did not do that. I think I just enjoyed going to the market. There were markets are a big thing in Guatemala, and so eventually we learned of even more remote markets, and that would be our weekend adventure and also we heard there were some Mayan ruins up in the area that had not been discovered, so that was often our weekend.
They had discovered them, but
Right.
science hadn't discovered them.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
So going to the markets, that was entertainment. That was fun. And so but I did pay my neighbors up in Cheho, very poor family, very poor. It was a mom who lived with, I think she had 5 children, and her husband had died by hiking, and he fell off the trail.
Wow.
and fell to his death. So the oldest, Anselmo, was approximately, I would say at the time, 13 years old. He was the man of the house, and the mother knew no Spanish whatsoever, and she had a young child on her back. And they had 1-room hut, a dirt floor, and they cooked inside the house on the traditional Mayan way on 3 rocks. So they had a fire in the home.
Mm-hmm.
And
A hole in the roof.
a hole in the roof.
Yeah.
And so she, was inhaling a lot of smoke. That was another Peace Corps
Sure.
program, was to build ceramic stoves. And I did do that.
You did some of that?
I had another Peace Corps volunteer come up to the site, and it was a lot of work because it meant carrying up gravel, cement,
Oh, wow.
clay to build the stove. But I did actually, Francisco, he agreed to have one built in his home. The locals were not keen on the ceramic stove because, number one, the fire on the floor provided light, provided warmth, and they were used to it. They were used to cooking upon it, and they were used to the warmth, and they needed the warmth because it was cold at night.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with smoke anyway. They would survive.
They didn't. Yeah.
It's part of life.
It's part of life. So that family, I paid Anselmo, or probably his mother, to wash my clothes. And they literally washed my clothes on a rock, scrubbing my clothes on a rock in the stream.
Yeah.
So I did pay for that. So.
But that was about all.
Yeah, I felt a little. You battle with your conscience because you feel. I mean, my shoes. I had hiking boots. I always felt, even though I dressed very modestly, I always sensed this. I was really a wealthy person in comparison.
And you were.
Yeah, and this family, they were so poor. And Anselmo, on top of that, being 13, the Guatemalan military would often come. He would not hike down to San Sebastian. And I asked him, why wouldn't you do that? And he picked up some Spanish, bright kid. And he said because he was afraid the military would scoop him up. And they did do that. They would just take young men. They considered him maybe 14, a young man.
That was their way of drafting people?
That was their way of drafting people. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. So he never went down. And then so I learned a lot from that family.
Have you kept in contact with them? I mean, is that possible?
So I did not, because I did try. There was no such thing as computers and email. Well, I take that back. If you went to the Peace Corps office, I think in '92 we had Hotmail, and we could write emails and use the computers in the Peace Corps office. But the villagers
didn't have any of that.
Yeah. So even to get a letter up to Cheho, a letter could be sent from the United States and reach San Sebastian, and somebody would hike it up to me. But most of the communication, if Peace Corps communicated with us, it would be through telegram. And we did receive telegrams, and because somebody from the village would go down to San Sebastian almost daily, and there was a little post office there, and they'd get a telegram, and they would send it up to us, and it would say, that's how I found out I needed to come to Guatemala City, that my father was ill.
Yeah.
That's how they communicated with us.
So that was an indication. That was the way you learned news from the United States.
Correct.
Because there weren't newspapers, there wasn't radio.
No, but I did have a shortwave radio, and I listened to Voice of America at night. That was part of my entertainment because it was dark at 6 p.m. And light at 6 a.m. You just sort of live with the sun, and then you lit candles, and then you get sleepy and go to sleep. And so, but my entertainment in the evenings was to listen to the Voice of America or the Christian Science Monitor.
Oh, you had that too.
I did, and I loved that.
Yeah, so you got real news.
I really did. Yes, I did.
I didn't. I didn't get anything like that.
I really enjoyed that. And again, I always I had shutters, and even though it was cold, I kept them open so people knew I wasn't concocting a witch's brew.
Even then, even later on, when they all knew you
I have to admit, even later on when it got really cold, I would shut the shutters. But they always knew they could come visit and knock on the door.
Tell me now about the Mayan ruins. I would have been white hot to go there. I mean, let's go now. First
Yeah.
time I heard they were around.
Well, there was one that had been established in Huehuetenango called Zacaleo, but unfortunately, it's yeah. One of the U.S. congressmen came to visit and came to Huehuetenango,
Oh,
and I met up with him. He was a senator or a congressman from Arizona. Very nice individual, and he came and visited at Zacaleo, but Zacaleo had been covered by concrete, so it had the shape of a Mayan temple, the same shape, but it was kind of ruined.
They'd ruined it?
They had ruined it. So that was the only main Mayan ruin that had been excavated. But then locals we would hear rumors, they would tell us about things, and when we go visit the markets, one was up in Todos Santos, which was a large, very indigenous market, very wonderful place to go. I still have clothing from that area on my wall back there, but anyway, those are some of the Mayan.
Oh yeah.
So, but children would bring us something and say it was taken from a Mayan ruin, and did I want to buy it? So that kind of turned me off of doing that, and I was a little more interested in some other things. So I have to admit, I was interested more in the markets, more in was there any wildlife left at all, the traditional Mayan outfits, and you asked about pay. So we were paid, I don't recall exactly how much, but I mean, I want to say $80 a month, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Monetary, I had well enough money to buy plenty of food, to pay for the rent. I still had the little house, remember, in Chantla. So sometimes I would go down and hike to San Sebastian, take the bus to Huehue and the little bus up to Chantla because I could get a hot shower. You could buy a little, what they call a calientador, to heat up water and take a shower and I'd meet up with a few Peace Corps volunteers at that location. So I would do that. You need contact with English speakers. You get it is very draining. Very draining. And you find yourself wanting to find other Americans. You learn more about your American culture by being away than you do here, I think.
I think so too.
You have that comparison and how much you miss it. You don't realize what it is until you leave it. But yeah, so that's about all. I did travel. I had enough money to travel a bit in Guatemala, and there was so much to see in Guatemala, and I did travel, and I did buy in the markets. They called it tipica, which were the Mayan women would hand make different huipiles, which are the traditional Mayan outfit, and each area had a different huipile. And so I wanted to buy those, and I had enough money to do that. That being said, if one was inclined to smoke or drink, that would take up, I would say, a huge amount of your money. So early on, I recall someone saying to me, when we had our site visits during training, the volunteer I met during my site visit, he was really nice. He said, if you don't smoke and drink, you'll save some money. You'll have plenty of money. And I don't mean plenty of money, but enough money. You certainly had enough money to live.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
At a higher level than many of the locals.
I lived very well on my money. except when I'd go on vacation.
Yeah.
And then I spent a lot of that money.
True.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, did you go on regular vacations or not?
I did.
And would you go with other PCVs?
I went on two major trips. One was, I think, around Christmas time, where we met up with some other volunteers and traveled to Belize. And
The country that might have been.
right, right. And it's very inexpensive to travel throughout Guatemala if you just take the local buses. And travel on the local buses is very inexpensive. We traveled light. We went to Belize. Belize was not very expensive either if you travel like locals.
Right.
And we stayed we found little, they called them hospedajes. I stayed with a local Belizean, I think you say, family. And I'd rather them get the money than...
Sure, absolutely.
And so, and that way I learned more about the culture. And I recall, they took good care of me. And I learned a lot. I wasn't by myself. I was with 4 other volunteers.
Yeah.
I did not travel far from my site alone. Yeah.
Did all these vacations turn out to be fun and okay and not problematic?
They did during that period of time.
Okay.
They did.
All right. I'm wondering if there are people that you met in Guatemala that you still keep up with now.
Yeah, I know. No, unfortunately. Unfortunately, no. Actually, there is a returned Peace Corps volunteer I recently reestablished communication with.
Who was there when you were?
Yes, he was in my training group.
Oh.
Craig Badger. And through my travel, my son is in college in Minnesota. Craig is from Minnesota. And actually we met on a webinar about a year ago, and he was on it. And through that, I got his contact information. And
did you know him right off?
I did. I knew him right off.
That must have been a shock.
It was a shock 30 years later.
Yeah.
And not only that, Craig took a job with Peace Corps. He's been working for Peace Corps ever since.
Oh, wow.
So, and we met up in Minnesota, and we keep in touch.
How great.
Locals. The reason why is, again, what I did when I initially left, and then, as I told you before, I did spend a 3rd year, and I went back to visit the village. Even 9 years out, I went back to visit. I left them with letters with stamps. All they had to do. But I got to thinking afterwards, I don't think they knew how to write.
Probably not.
So I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was that, and I've never heard from them. And
well, I was also going to ask about
them.
Facebook. Is that a possible way?
No. Now, of course, but no.
Well, there wasn't any Facebook then, but there is now.
No, and again, these people, maybe someone like Renate that I mentioned earlier, because he was more educated. He lived in Huehuetenango. There was actually a branch of the University of San Carlos in Huehuetenango, and he taught there. He was a professor there. Someone like him, I probably, had I kept in touch, could have kept in touch with him. But the villagers, the people I worked with,
no way.
No way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I went back to visit 9 years later with my husband because I wanted him to see the site.
Sure. And he had been in Peace Corps too.
That's right. But before we met, he had been in Peace Corps in Ghana, West Africa. Yeah.
Okay. But you wanted him to see where you were, and
you
did, and that must have been tremendous.
It was.
Great trip.
It was.
People all remembered you?
They did. They did. And, they changed, and the village had changed, and I even took my niece up there. So, I the
You mean another time?
earlier, yeah, after I had completed my service, I wanted to stay on with Peace Corps, but the Peace Corps felt that site was too remote. They didn't send any more volunteers there.
So you wanted to sign on for a third year, right?
I thought about it, yeah,
In that site.
I did. But then I thought, because Mike left, that was a big, it was I agree. Actually, it was just too remote. They, at the time, the only way, if we had had an emergency in the village, Peace Corps had us give them a drawing. I don't know if they did this for you, but we had to make a drawing of our site of where a helicopter could land
No.
if we needed it to be evacuated.
Huh. Wow.
A helicopter landing pad. So anyway, they did not want another volunteer in that site. And I just, at being a single woman, it was difficult. I had two friends had traveled to Mexico. This was towards the end of my service, probably in 1992, and they had been raped.
Gosh.
And so,
did you hear from them?
Yeah, they actually came up to visit my site, and they had left. Peace Corps paid for them to go back to Washington, D.C. and stay for a number of months and receive counseling. And it was their decision. Did they want to go back or did they want to go home? And they decided to come back. And they came back to Guatemala.
Were they raped together? I mean, did this all happen?
They were held at gunpoint.
They were together, and they were, okay.
Held at gunpoint, pulled into the woods, and raped.
Damn.
It gave me a very different feeling of traveling alone.
Yeah.
In Guatemala. So now, again, they had traveled. Peace Corps told you areas to stay away from, and this was an area they had been warned to stay away from, and they had left the beaten path, to say. They had gotten off. They had gone up to see some ruins in Oaxaca, or Chiapas, or Oaxaca, Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And they had gone into a very isolated area, and that's where it happened.
Okay. Have you thought much about your major accomplishments in Peace Corps? And if you have, can you share that with us?
Well, I always look back and I think it always brings a very strong feeling in my heart of how much I miss the people I worked with, how much I grew to love them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel they gave me much more than I gave them.
Mm-hmm. Never heard a Peace Corps volunteer who didn't say that. And everybody means it too.
And I appreciate them taking me into their community and providing me safety and all that they did. I feel everything I've done since that time has been colored by my experience there, has been the choices and decisions I've made ever since that time reflect back on that experience.
Can you give me one example of that?
When I first came back, I took a job outside of Dallas in Garland, Texas. I taught, and they needed someone who spoke Spanish. And I fell in love with teaching in the classroom. I taught second grade, but the program was a dual language program, and because of my Spanish, I got the job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had enough money, I saved up money to go back and visit the village. I missed it so badly. I had a very difficult time letting go. I wanted to go back. I wanted to do more for the village. So, what did I accomplish? I think what I accomplished, the primary thing I accomplished was in the name Peace Corps. Peace. The indigenous people no longer feel that white people, all white people, are there to steal their children. In that sense, I established peace.
Wow, that's amazing.
Just that. Just being there. Being me, showing that I was sincere, and living with them at their level, not at some other level, but primarily at their level.
Right.
I gained their trust. So that's where peace comes in.
Now you said that you served some other organization.
Yeah, I wanted to stay in Guatemala, but I felt, I don't know, because my program, because that site was no longer, like Craig stayed on in his site, but my site, they kind of closed that for volunteers. It was just too remote. So, and too dangerous for women because of some of the things that had happened. And so I stayed, I wanted to stay in Guatemala. I left Guatemala, I came to the United States. I worked up in Alaska again. But I at that time, there was a program in Antigua, Guatemala, which is a beautiful, large town, not far from Guatemala City, and just nestled in volcanoes. And there was a program called, at the time it was called the Godchild Project. It was based out of Minnesota. But I contacted them and I found out what they were doing, and I asked if I could volunteer, and they said yes. So I went back to Guatemala and worked for them for a year. But during that time, I went back to Cheho and visited a few times. And
Sure.
I really wanted to help them in some way. I wanted to continue.
You have any regrets about your Peace Corps service at all? Gosh, I wish I did. If I'd known now what I knew then, what I knew, I would have done this, or I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I don't think you do, because
I don't
if
have
you
any
do,
regrets.
they're probably right there.
You know, the only thing was when Mike left, I felt very, I wish I could have summoned the courage to stay by myself. But I just couldn't. Someone else might have, you know.
Do you look at him as your protector in a way?
Well, I think I did, yeah. Well, maybe not my protector, but it was very difficult for me. I had to always summon up the courage to hike back up to Cheho. Not so much the initial year afterwards, but as time went on, it's just a very remote site, and again, the problem of child adoption, and I believe it was 1994 or 95, in an indigenous area, not my site, but not far away, an American tourist had gone up to one of the markets, and unfortunately what had happened was that one of the women selling vegetables in the market, her child had wandered away, and she shouted out, my child, I can't find my child." Well, what happened was the American tourist became the scapegoat, and that woman was chased. The locals chased her into the local municipality building and she locked herself in a room, and this is a true story. And the villagers, it became a mob mentality. And in the local newspapers even, you would see these horrific pictures of supposed dead children or where organs had been taken. It was, and they set fire to tires, and they stormed the building, and they beat her. She was taken back to the United States, and she was in a vegetative state and no longer recovered. So after that, the whole entire Peace Corps was pulled in Guatemala, only in Guatemala, pulled to the capital. They discussed it to
all volunteers.
All volunteers. And so I was part of the program in Antigua, the Godchild Project. And I learned about that. And one of the things we were told is you do not stare at a Guatemalan child on the bus. So whenever I rode the bus, somebody here.
Yeah, 2 girls are here.
You want to pause it?
Yeah, better. Okay.
Yeah, so the Peace Corps told us, when you're riding the buses, please don't stare at a Guatemalan child, especially indigenous. Number 1, they think it's the evil eye. Number 2, there's suspicion. But they after that training, and I think Peace Corps was very quick to pull people in, they let people back out. But then there were areas of Guatemala we were told not to go to, and so that was that.
Yeah.
So traveling about Guatemala, I became a little afraid by myself as a woman. Yeah.
Okay. Have you kept up with Mike?
I lost track of Mike. I'd like to. Yeah.
Because you all went through a lot for a long time.
We went through a lot together. We just didn't quite end on a good note. So, but yeah, he's doing okay. I heard through Craig about him, and I think my intention is to contact him again. I did see him 5 years later, and he's doing fine, and we do have a connection. You're right. Oh my goodness. I even have I drew pictures of the trails we took and things.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well,
I think I would like to say 2 more things,
all right.
Quick things.
Absolutely.
One is, I just wanted this recorded, a story, because I don't know if volunteers today will have, they will have wonderful experiences, but when I went, because I was the first, Mike and I were both the first white people they had encountered, they asked us some interesting questions.
They asked you what?
Some interesting questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Once we gained their trust. One of them was, is it true that every American has a money-making machine in their home? And all I could think of, number 1, how in the world are Americans so wealthy? They work themselves to the bone, and they cannot get ahead. They can survive. But then I thought down in Huehuetenango there was a shop that sold TVs, and you could watch a TV through the window, and maybe they saw an ATM machine where you push buttons
and the money
when it came out. And the other question I had, aside from the insect question, was, is it true that a man really walked on the sun?
On the sun?
You know how stories change as they get passed down. So I told him it was the moon, and we talked about what the sun is. And
did they not know that a man had walked on the moon?
They had heard something about it, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked, is it true?
But it got to be the sun somehow.
Instead of the moon.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other one was, now it slipped my mind, but, about airplanes.
Oh.
So flights flew out of Guatemala City daily, but they had never been to Guatemala City. So, but they could, by the time a flight was over Huehuetenango, or the village, they could only hear it. It was so high in the sky. But occasionally they could see it. And they asked me how in the world something that heavy could get up in the air. So they were just questions like that.
Of course.
And one farmer once said to me, I always felt uncomfortable being asked, how much is a ticket to the United States and how much does a farmer make in the United States, because I felt a little guilty. But one farmer said to me, I said, the United States is a wonderful place, but it costs a lot more to live there, and not everybody that goes there is happy. And I recall what the farmer said to me. He said, we are all from the same seed. Being a farmer, he would think of seed. So that touched my heart very deeply.
Yeah.
We are all from the same seed. Even though we are worlds apart, he connected us. And that really touched me.
That's terrific. Yeah. Was there something else? You said there were two things you wanted to tell me.
I think those were the main stories. You asked if in traveling I ever had a treacherous experience once. This was after Peace Corps. I was traveling alone, and I had my passport with me.
Are we talking about Guatemala still?
I was in Guatemala, yes.
Okay.
I was in Guatemala, but I was working with the Godchild Project. But I was helping some doctors that had come down. I was helping them translate. They were doing surgical procedures. And because there was a lot of cleft lip and cleft palate up there. And so I was on my way, and I had to change buses, and I was at a stop just right along the highway, the Pan American Highway, which is 2 lanes. And I stopped, and for some silly reason, I had never taken, my passport was always part of my body. You wore it, even when you went to the shower, you just carried it with you. But I had set it down. And then I got back on the bus, and I left my passport on that spot. And the bus was scary because I had to sit on a bucket. It was so full, I had to sit on a bucket, and the driver you could see the engine because it had a hole in it, and you could see and he was occasionally dumping water on it. It was just one of these, oh my goodness. And he was driving recklessly and I was very frightened. And to not have my passport. And often at stops, the Guatemala military, you'd see young men with machine guns. So that, and there was one other experience that was very scary, but I just realized that travels, you keep your passport, and you stay in areas that Peace Corps tells you to stay, and you take precautions, that's all. So...
Now, you are a big Peace Corps advocate, correct?
Yes.
How has that been manifest since your service?
So Peace Corps has the 3 goals, and the third goal is to bring Peace Corps back to your home country. And so I take that very seriously and talk about the Peace Corps. Anytime I'm asked to speak at a school or just to individuals I meet, I talk about the Peace Corps and the benefits of being in the Peace Corps.
But you do that in schools?
I have.
You let the schools know that you're available to talk about Peace Corps?
I do. There used to be a program, maybe there still is, and they would connect a school to either a Peace Corps volunteer in country or a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And they called it the Speakers Bureau.
Right, I was part of that, and then it seemed to go away.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, the pandemic and all has changed some things. But, if I really...
Sure did.
And then of course there are the Return Peace Corps groups in most of your major cities, and it is very important to establish one and become a member of one.
And you were the leader of the one here in Oklahoma
I
City.
was for a time, yes.
That's right.
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it functioned very well for a while.
It did. It just takes some time and energy and just...
And commitment from the other RPCVs.
Right.
It can't be
One
just
person
you.
can't do it.
No.
Right.
No. So, what about your children? Have you tried to? I mean,
Well,
it's never too late.
yeah, no, I hear them talk about it all. I repeat, they have heard my husband and I speak about Peace Corps their whole lives. And I think to push it upon them would probably have the opposite effect.
Mm-hmm.
But my son has already talked about when he finishes college, he wants to join the Peace Corps. Wow. Take a break. Yes.
Fantastic.
I can't speak highly enough of it, because once I came back from the Peace Corps, then he wants to go to graduate school, and they have all kinds of Peace Corps fellowships. I did one at Johns Hopkins University.
You did one?
I did. And I worked for AmeriCorps in the Peace Corps Fellowship Program. That just about covered the cost of
Wow.
school there, yeah.
I didn't know that you'd done AmeriCorps.
I did that. AmeriCorps was, again, another outstanding program, just
That's
like the
1 year?
Peace Corps. You put in hours, a certain number of hours, so it really just depends on how busy you are, how you can. And so I worked with, mobile meals through that program. I worked with some social services. I set up some healthcare programs. Didn't set them up by myself, but I helped. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, that initial question when what was asked, why do you want to go help in another country and not help your own country? AmeriCorps, I came back and did that. So I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Good program.
Wow. Is there anything that you can think of now that you'd like to contribute to this that you haven't so far? Maybe something you thought about while we were doing the interview and it didn't seem to fit in?
Something that could go down through the ages, I guess. Nothing in my life has been so life-changing
Mm-hmm.
as my Peace Corps experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've carried it with me ever since. And I wish
You have.
everybody could have that experience. It's colored my world, and I see the world differently. And everything I've done, again, has been because of that experience. And so I guess it is selfish in a way, because again, Peace Corps does not begin and establish huge programs. It's the little things, the little things that Peace Corps does, the individual contacts you make. Maybe you are able to continue communication once you come back with your host country counterparts.
Oh, it's completely different now.
Yeah, it's completely different now. But at the same time, it's valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Valuable. So valuable. To get to know and respect people.
Were you really worried during the pandemic when volunteers were being pulled out of every country? I believe every single country.
I was.
And there was nothing for a while.
I was very worried.
So was I.
I was very worried because I don't think people understand the true value of Peace Corps. They think it is a huge humanitarian program. It is not. It is established so that people around the world can get to know one another, and through that understand that we're all in this world together. And I think as I see the approach, as I see the military growing, I hope the Peace Corps grows equally.
Yep.
That is my hope for the future.
That's quite something to contemplate even. Yeah. Well, I think that's gonna...
She's wearing what they wore. This is Epinchejo in this area of Guatemala.
And tell us again who this is.
Her name is Reina. She's a little girl about 3 or 4 or 5, and she's a very happy little girl. She was helping her mother wash clothes when I took this picture, and she had a little doll that her father carved with his machete.
With a machete, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Machete and a hoe. That's the only things they had, the only tools they had.
Wow. Just cute as can be.
Yeah.
All right. Hey.
So this is a local woman, well, a woman from the village of Chelam. I hike to Chelam weekly, and what she's doing is, this is wool on the ground that came from sheep up there in the area, and she is taking that wool and she's spinning it into yarn.
Ah.
And then she will use that yarn to use a back strap, and I'm going to show you that. Where'd my little... Where'd it go? A backstrap loom. This is a woman, and she's using that wool, and they will dye it, and then they will weave using this manner around their back, and they will hand make their clothing.
Ah, wow.
And then they wear the same clothing every day. And as you can see, the child is wearing the same, the girl. Her name is Reina. Did I already show her?
You did.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I'll just show, this book is one of my treasured books, The Maya of Guatemala. I bought this at a museum in Guatemala City that talks about all the different Mayan costumes, and somebody has hand, painted or drawn.
Yeah.
So,
Gorgeous.
anyway.
Wow.
Some of my treasures.
Yes.